Okay, I want you to imagine for a second that you are the chief engineer of one of history's absolute greatest civilizations. Your people have built these magnificent, sprawling cities. You're walking through bustling streets bathed in sunlight, surrounded by brilliant architects, advanced water systems, literally generations of accumulated knowledge. It's the peak of your society. But then, one day, your ruler gathers the kingdom's top minds and drops a terrifying message. One day, our civilization may never see the surface again. You don't know exactly when this catastrophe is going to strike, and honestly, you don't even know why. All you know is that the blue sky above you, it's temporary. But if that day comes, your people have to survive. And as the chief engineer, the entire burden of that survival rests squarely on your shoulders. You have to figure out how to move an entire massive society directly into the earth. So, if you were that chief engineer, what would you build first? When you're facing the ultimate, terrifying deadline, where does the work even begin? Would your instinct be to just start desperately digging hidden tunnels into the side of the nearest mountain? Or maybe you try to construct giant underground food stores, just hoping you could hoard enough grain to outlast whatever is coming. Or would you take a step back and realize that just stockpiling stuff isn't going to cut it? Would you realize that actual, true survival means preparing your entire civilization decades or maybe even multiple generations in advance? It's a wildly fascinating question. And honestly, it completely flips how we think about ancient engineering, human resilience, and what it actually takes to build a world in the pitch dark.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a really unique source. It's called the Underground Civilization Engineering Model, or UCM, and it was developed by researcher Hira Ansari. We're going to unpack this framework to investigate a truly mind-bending concept. We're looking at the strict, nuts-and-bolts engineering feasibility of a hypothetical, long-term subterranean civilization. Listen, we aren't talking about folklore or myths today. We are talking about blueprints, physics, and sociology. We want to know, strictly from a scientific and systems engineering perspective, if an ancient society could actually pull off a permanent move underground. To really wrap our heads around this, we first have to separate the Hollywood myth from the harsh engineering reality. You know the disaster movies, right? The ones where humanity scurries into caves at the absolute last literal second to wait out some global catastrophe. It makes for amazing cinema, but systems engineering tells us a completely different story. A sudden, unplanned migration underground that is absolutely not a viable survival strategy. In fact, according to modern science, taking a massive population underground without extensive pre-existing infrastructure is basically a guaranteed death sentence. The subterranean environment is just way too hostile. You simply cannot wing it.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at exactly why sudden isolation fails so catastrophically. According to Hira Ansari's UCMF framework, an unplanned migration triggers this terrifying chain reaction called the failure cascade model. Imagine the timeline here. Day 1, you have a surface event that forces everyone underground. Bam, this immediately leads to severe infrastructure damage. By day 3, you're facing instant resource disruption. The air gets stale, the makeshift water supply is totally contaminated. By week 2, you've got a massive public health crisis on your hands. Your healthy workforce is dropping, maintenance grinds to a complete halt, and civilizational decline becomes completely inevitable. You just cannot build complex life support systems while your population is actively dying of starvation and disease.
But this creates an incredible mystery. If a sudden panicked migration means certain death, and if Earth's shallow crust is naturally dark and incredibly hostile to human life, how could any ancient society possibly avoid this inevitable collapse? If they somehow knew a cataclysm was coming, how could they make sure they didn't just casually walk into their own tomb? What if the real answer to surviving a global catastrophe is completely different from what we've always assumed? What if survival isn't about running and hiding, but something far, far more calculated? And that brings us to the core of today's explainer, the Prepared Civilization Model, or PCM. This is what researcher Hira Ansari proposes. The PCM suggests that a successful underground civilization absolutely wouldn't emerge suddenly after a catastrophe. No way. Instead, an engineering-first approach requires that subterranean infrastructure be gradually, meticulously developed over many generations, long before they are ever geographically isolated. Think of it kind of like building a submarine. You don't wait until you're 500 feet underwater to start sealing the leaks and putting in the oxygen scrubbers, right? An ancient society would have to build their underground world while they were still safely connected to the resources and the sunlight up on the surface. But here's where the thought experiment gets really challenging. We have to ask ourselves, would such long-term planning really be possible? Think about our cities today. Think about how incredibly hard it is for modern governments to secure funding and just maintain enough focus to finish like a 10-year highway project. Now imagine asking an ancient society to dedicate a massive chunk of its economy and labor force to build an entire subterranean world. And the real kicker? The people building it know they will probably never even live to see the final result. Could an ancient society actually sustain that kind of unyielding, obsessive engineering focus? Engineering gives us a very stark perspective on this, mainly because solving one biological requirement immediately creates the next massive engineering headache. It is a multi-generational problem chain, and the cruel irony here is that every single solution causes a brand new crisis. So you start with breathable air. Awesome. But once you solve ventilation, well, now you need reliable water. Okay, you get water, but now you need to figure out sustainable food production without any sunlight. But wait, growing food underground requires massive artificial energy generation, and generating that much energy in a closed box produces toxic exhaust or immense heat, which immediately ruins the breathable air you've literally just secured. And finally, all of this creates biological waste that has to be recycled. It's just an unbroken, vicious chain of survival needs. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the crucial difference between isolated fixes and integrated systems engineering. Modern engineers don't build a city's sprawling water network and then, later on, start thinking about where the electrical grid might go. They have to plan the whole shebang simultaneously. If a prepared civilization existed, they couldn't just dig a cave, plant a farm, and hope for the best. If you try to build these systems separately, you end up with a ventilation shaft that accidentally floods your electrical systems. They would have to engineer air, water, food, and energy as one completely integrated, perfectly balanced living machine right from day one. But solving the physical engineering creates another massive, incredibly human problem. Could ancient political leadership remain stable enough to actually finish the job? Maintaining resource allocation, managing a huge workforce, and keeping an entire society focused on a subterranean project for centuries? That is an organizational nightmare. Imagine a new ruler comes to power and decides, hey, why are we spending half our kingdom's wealth on a dark hole in the ground when we could be building palaces? Regimes fall, priorities change. Over 300 or 400 years, how would a society guarantee that this grand project wouldn't just be totally abandoned? According to the UCEM framework, this naturally leads to what is called the Survival Knowledge Principle, or SKP. If a civilization is dedicating itself to preparing for long-term isolation, it has to eventually prioritize practical survival skills over non-essential knowledge. The society would have to ruthlessly streamline itself. In this new world, the master poet or the surface philosopher, they suddenly have absolutely no value compared to the apprentice who knows exactly how to filter toxic groundwater. Over generations, a society would naturally preserve crucial information, like deep mining and structural engineering, mostly through direct apprenticeship. And knowledge that no longer provides practical, everyday value, it would gradually, inevitably, just be lost. Now, as critical thinkers, we've got to ask the big question. What does the evidence actually tell us today? The missing evidence counterargument is absolutely vital here. We have to be totally transparent. Currently, there is a lack of direct archaeological confirmation for this kind of large-scale, multi-generational subterranean preparation. Critics rightly point out that, hey, we haven't found the ruins of these massive integrated systems, but we also have to remember the reality of incomplete geological exploration. Our deep mountain regions are incredibly massive, remote, and largely unmapped deep beneath the surface. Plus, there's a lot of healthy scientific uncertainty regarding the exact technological limits of ancient societies. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the UCM framework employs such a rigorous, multidisciplinary filter for its investigations. We simply cannot rely on ancient myths, folklore, or wild internet assumptions. If we want to find out if this is actually possible, we have to evaluate claims using hard geology, systems engineering, remote sensing, and traditional archaeology. It is a strict, evidence-based approach to exploring these hidden possibilities. It forces us to separate wildly imaginative conspiracy theories from actual scientific modeling, making sure that any hypothesis is deeply grounded in the unforgiving laws of physics and human biology. So, the absolutely crucial takeaway for us today is this: engineering feasibility is not historical proof. The prepared civilization model is a phenomenal thought experiment. It shows us exactly how an ancient society could theoretically overcome the immense physical barriers of moving underground through multi-generational planning. It's a brilliant working hypothesis that pushes the very limits of what humanity is physically and organizationally capable of doing under extreme duress. But we have to remember, it is just a model. As of right now, it's not a proven historical fact, but rather an amazing exploration of our absolute upper limits as a species. Preparation over panic. That is the only mathematical way a civilization could survive a permanent move into the dark. But as we've seen, a prepared civilization needs way more than just isolated systems and raw materials. It needs a flawless master blueprint holding every single drop of water and breath of air together in perfect balance. Which leaves us with the ultimate provocative question. If humanity's survival depended on it tomorrow, could we, with all of our modern technology, actually write that master plan? Could we execute it before time ran out? It's a chilling thought, right? And it completely redefines how we view the ground beneath our feet.